Okay, thank you. Thank you. Listen, for all the great speakers, and thanks very much for the event. Okay, I want to, many speakers have referred to the question of the aggression which is undertaken by the United States. So I want to concentrate more specifically on the question of the war in Ukraine, because I think this is a qualitative step for the United States and opens up a very serious and dangerous period for humanity. So I want to try to explain why. Up until now, the United States has attacked developing countries, Serbia, Iraq, invaded Afghanistan, bombed Libya, etc. There are others as well. This was totally unjust, but the United States knew, one, it had overwhelming military superiority, and secondly, there was no threat of a nuclear conflict coming out of it. But in the case of Ukraine, the United States was prepared quite consciously to cross the red lines of a nuclear-armed major state, Russia. It knew that these were the red lines. Why? Firstly, because Russia said it. Secondly, because it can work it out very simply. There's a very clear comparison, which is to Cuba in 1962. When there were missiles in Cuba in 1962, the United States made quite clear that it was prepared to have, if necessary, world nuclear war in order to remove them. It was totally unacceptable. Why? Because missiles in Cuba were 800 kilometers from Washington, and it would make military defense of the United States against surprise attack impossible. Well, actually, the distance from Kiev to Moscow is half the distance from Havana to Moscow. So you don't have to be a brilliant military strategist to work out that if the defense of the United States from a missile attack from Cuba is impossible, the attack on Russia from missiles and NATO inside Ukraine is even more impossible. So the United States knew, both from what Russia had said and from its own experience, what the stakes were. Yet it was perfectly prepared to go ahead. Now, it was careful on one thing. It didn't know what the response would be. That is why Biden made clear that the United States would not commit military force. So direct military force, it would supply weapons, etc. There's a very good Chinese phrase which says, crossing the river while feeling the stones beneath your feet. It's normally used about Chinese economic policy, but it's very good. In this case, it explains it. The US knew it could attack developing countries and did so. It didn't know what would be exactly the response when it crossed Russia's red lines, but it was prepared to do so. And this is a qualitative escalation. Also, the United States at the present time very actively attempting to develop a first strike nuclear capacity against Russia and China. This is not secret. This is quite openly stated by theorists of US foreign policy. And it's shown in the US withdrawal from a whole series of arms limitation and arms control treaties, Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, etc. Now, therefore, this is the United States finding out what escalation it can do. Why did it attack Russia? And because this is what it is. It knew that when it went into the Ukraine, Russia, well, it hoped, of course, Russia would just not respond. Then that would be a big victory for the United States. But it knew there was certainly a risk that if it moved Ukraine into NATO, there would be a conflict, which of course there has been. In 1962, the Soviet leadership had the good sense to take the missiles out of Cuba. In the case of the United States, it refused to take off the table Ukraine joining NATO. If it had done so, there would have been no war. Okay. There is a booklet, incidentally, coming out on this, published by No Cold War, Monthly Review, and Tricontinental, which has got articles by John Bellamy Foster, who's the editor of Monthly Review, Debbie Venizali, an introduction by VJ, and an article by myself. I hope people will read it incidentally when it comes out, because it looks at these things in more detail. Why did it attack Russia? It was part of its policy against China. The United States is losing in peaceful economic competition with China. This has led some on the left, in my opinion, to a false view that somehow the defeat of the United States is inevitable or determined by economic forces. And I have to say, I don't agree with it. The United States still maintains one area in which it's absolutely dominant, which is military. And therefore, the temptation for the United States is to attempt to use its military power in order to compensate for its economic defeat. And this is the great danger which confronts the world. If we look at it from that point of view, what is the significance of the good relations between China and Russia? It's not that China is going to attack the United States. It doesn't have 800 military bases around the world like the United States. Russia doesn't have 800 military bases around the world like the United States. It's the following. Russia is the only power which has nuclear parity with the United States. Eventually, China will have nuclear parity with the United States, but that will take quite some time. Russia has it now. Therefore, the good relations which exist between Russia and China are a big obstacle for the United States. And what the United States wanted to do was to knock Russia out of its good relations with China, either by making concessions to Russia, that was the old policy of Kissinger, or by force. And that's why it's attacked. It was prepared to have this confrontation with Russia. It is immediately having a confrontation with Russia, but its strategic goal is to isolate and attack China. And we should have no illusions. The United States has shown no inclination to be inhibited by anything. I am perfectly believe, without second hesitation, anybody else should do, if the United States could gain a first strike nuclear capacity against Russia or China, or Russia and China, it would use it. There is no degree of ruthlessness to which the United States has shown it won't go. It completely destroyed North Korea. It attempted to completely destroy the north of Vietnam, and it would do things in that way. Therefore, we have to understand that we are at a very crucial point of escalation. And therefore, the outcome of the war in Ukraine is very important. If the United States, it's testing, it knows it can attack developing countries. Now it's seeing if it can, in fact, provoke a war with Russia. And if it can do that, it will go further against the question of China, and it will go further against the question of the use of nuclear weapons. What is crucial in that situation is that all progressive forces in the world unite. And by all, I mean not merely the ones that we know in Britain. I'm absolutely in favor of Stop the War, CND, Britain, No Cold War Britain, organising together, but I'm in favour of people who are not really part of the left at all also becoming involved in this. There are people in the United States who are supporters of the United States who think it's crazy to play around with such wars. I'm all in favour of supporting them. There are some people who I have total disagreement with, Vince Cable, for example, who want a rational policy to China. So confronted with this real danger to humanity, this qualitative escalation, first we have to make sure that the United States is defeated in this attempt to escalate war. And secondly, we have to understand that it will continue, and this is a new point in escalation. Thank you very much, and I hope you'll all support No Cold War Britain, of course.